Danger Dolan. From people waking up at their own funeral to others trapped in a morgue freezer after getting pronounced dead, we count 15 crazy cases of clinically dead people somehow rising back from the grave.
Number 15.
Hamdi Hafez Al-Nubi, a 28-year-old waiter from Egypt who suffered a heart attack while working and promptly declared dead. As his death certificate was being written, the doctor noticed his body was still warm, and after checking his vital signs, realized he'd been clinging to life. He was then revived, and his mother, who was in early mourning, fainted upon hearing he was still alive. The funeral was quickly turned into a celebration at the miraculous resurrection.
Number 14.
Ludmila Stebleskaya. This woman has died several times, and on no less than 2 occasions, she was moments from getting cut open for the autopsy when she sprung to life. And one time she even spent 3 days lying in a freezing cold morgue before doctors realized she was still alive. In fact, she was so cold that her skin had begun to peel off, and her family had organized an expensive funeral which went to waste. She'd had a history of heart problems, and only 2 years ago she ended up dead again, only to be revived hours later.
Number 13.
Marjorie McCall, an old Irish story that changes details with each retelling, but believed to have been based on 18th century fact. It goes that a rich woman called Marjorie died from a fever, and her husband tried to take off her golden wedding ring, but her finger was too swollen. She was hastily buried in the nearby cemetery, but some grave robbers came to unbury her and take off the ring, which they planned to cut off with her finger. Mid-cut, she awoke and screamed, still alive, scaring off the robbers. She then ran back to her husband, all creepy, covered in dirt and blood, scaring him so much that he dropped dead on the spot. He was then buried in her shallow grave.
Number 12.
Kelvin Santos, a 2-year-old child that died of pneumonia, but just before his funeral was about to begin, he sat up in the open coffin and asked, "Daddy, can I have some water?" Everyone present started screaming and making a fuss, and both parents thought it was a miracle, but then he laid back down and stopped breathing again. The family filed for medical malpractice, but they never could revive poor Kelvin.
Number 11.
A man from Johannesburg. It was July 2011 when an 80-year-old man was hauled into a morgue and placed in one of the freezers. Not even 24 hours later, the morgue's owner, Ayanda Makolo, heard screaming coming from the fridges. He actually thought it was a ghost coming to attack him, so he called police to come and handle it for him. The frozen man was thawed and sent to a hospital, making a full recovery. Well, as recovered as he can be after being frozen, left for dead, and then rescued by armed police officers.
Number 10.
Walter Williams, a 78-year-old man from Mississippi who was accurately described as dead by one of the nurses who looked after him in 2014. A coroner was informed, and he too verified that Walter was dead, but just as he was getting shoved into a body bag, it was noticed that Walter seemed to be kicking his legs, so they listened to his chest and noticed a heartbeat. It was later theorized that his heart had been later jump-started by a defibrillator embedded in his chest.
Number 9.
Los Milagros Veron. This baby was born 3 months premature and quickly sent off to the morgue. Luckily though, her parents insisted they be allowed to see her one last time, and it was inside the coffin sealed for 12 hours they heard a faint cry. It was opened and there was baby Luz, cold and weak but very much alive. Originally, the baby's name was to be Lucia, but they changed it because her new name means miracle light.
Number 8.
A Saudi woman. It was 2009 when a cesarean gone wrong happened to a woman in labor and she died. The husband was given the birth-defected baby and a death certificate for his late wife, and her body was hauled away to the morgue. 2 hours later though, she awoke in the freezer and started screaming and banging on the door until a worker came to rescue her. The husband was forced to return her death certificate since, despite his hopes, he couldn't keep it as a souvenir.
Number 7.
Carlos Cornejo, a man from Venezuela who woke up during his own autopsy. Declared dead in a highway accident in 2007, he was taken away by medical examiners before his wife could even identify the corpse. In the midst of his autopsy, when they were cutting into his face, they noted the absurdly high amount of fresh blood falling out. And then Carlos woke up screaming and hollering with the surgeons falling over themselves to stitch up the wound. Carlos later noted, "I woke up because the pain was unbearable."
Number 6.
Erica Negrelli. This is a horrifying story that ends quite happily. Erica was an English teacher from Missouri, pregnant with her child when, one day, she just passed out. Her husband called 911 and soon she was taken to a hospital, but her heart stopped and they had to deliver the baby from her corpse before it died too. After the delivery, her heart began beating again and she was put into a medically induced coma for 5 days. It turns out all she needed was a pacemaker, so now both her and her daughter are alive to this day.
Number 5.
Mandlo. This is the story of a prostitute from Zimbabwe who, while engaging in her select field of trade with a client, she suddenly collapsed on him and died. He scarpered out of the hotel when the cops arrived and they sealed her up in a steel coffin, but then the prostitute woke up and shouted, "You want to kill me?" A bunch of Gawkers were so shocked that they sprinted away as fast as they could run.
Number 4.
Vagilyu Mukamatsinov, a 49-year-old woman from Russia who was mistakenly pronounced dead and, while she was at her own funeral surrounded by sobbing relatives, woke up. The shock and horror of waking up at her own funeral caused a heart attack, and once she was taken back to hospital, she was declared deceased once again. Pretty much a bad day all around.
Number 3.
Anne Green, another story from long ago, 1650, about a woman convicted of murdering her bastard child and hiding the body. She was sentenced to death by hanging and was even held down by a group of people to speed up the choking process, but when they cut her down and prepared to perform an autopsy, she somehow managed to survive. Her would-be murderers were so impressed that they let her live, and she did so, even bearing 3 more children as years went by.
Number 2.
Li Zufeng, a 95-year-old woman found lying dead in her home by a neighbor. They placed her in a coffin with the tradition of waiting days before burial. This worked in Li's favor though, since she climbed out of the coffin not too long after and went about her day cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. Unluckily though, they also burned pretty much all of her possessions since they assumed her to be dead. This, she was not so thrilled about.
Number 1.
Val Thomas, a woman from West Virginia who suffered multiple heart attacks and didn't even register brainwaves for over 17 hours. She had no heartbeat, no pulse, and yet after all the cables had been pulled, she miraculously woke up and started talking. She was then taken to a special clinic and checked, but she was perfectly fine. That's it for this countdown. Be sure to like the Facebook page and follow me on Twitter if you want to be informed about new videos as they go up. And have a good one! A 2-year-old child that died of